All-Stars, Pro Bowlers, Hall of Famers, an Olympic gold medal, a Heisman Trophy, 2 Super Bowl rings, and 2 World Series MVPs. Enough records, awards, and memories to fill an encyclopedia. In the 1950s and 60s, one Omaha neighborhood, less than 2 square miles in size, single-handedly produced Nebraska's greatest generation of athletes. They came from the same schools and coaches, the same gyms and sandlots. They carried the same dreams. In the face of segregation and discrimination, they pushed each other to break barriers. Together in triumph, they put North Omaha on the map. Together in heartbreak, they watched it burn.
That 2 square miles produced an incredible, diverse number of national level athletes.
Bob Gibson, a Harlem Globetrotter turned St. Louis Cardinal, defined dominance with a 1.12 ERA in 1968. He also won 2 World Series MVPs and 2 Cy Youngs. Bob Boozer, a sweet shooting gentle giant, earned an Olympic gold medal and an NBA championship ring. Roger Sayers, a sprinter at Omaha University, staked his claim in 1962 as the world's fastest man. He beat Bullet Bob Hayes. Gale Sayers, perhaps the most dazzling running back in football history, made first-team All-Pro 4 times with the Chicago Bears. Marlon Briscoe became the first black man to start a professional game at quarterback. Then he earned 2 Pro Bowls and played in 2 Super Bowls as a wide receiver. Ron Boone, a late bloomer out of Omaha Tech, finished 3rd all-time in ABA scoring. Johnny Rodgers. He watched all those heroes go through his neighborhood before seizing his own glory. 2 national championships and a Heisman Trophy later, he remains one of the greatest college football players ever.
I'm talking about Hall of Fame baseball, Hall of Fame basketball, Heisman Trophy. I mean, we're talking about the upper crust from these 2 square miles.
It was very extraordinary, and I don't know that it could be recreated.
I was pretty proud of these guys because, I knew them for one, everybody. I knew Gibson when he was much younger, lived over on Pinckney, and you knew about Bob. He was an incredible athlete, and Boozer, of course, he played at Tech High. He was, an incredible player there. And so, when you see these guys are, making it as pro athletes, it is a sense of pride. And most of the athletes, of course, hey, I played with this guy, so it was that sort of thing. Yeah, if only I had, maybe I could have been me.
It was a culture of excellence in athletics that kept feeding on itself.
What it was a reflection of, or what it said to me was, man, if we are capable of this in this small space, with about a square mile of individuals in it, if we are capable of this, what are we really capable of? What could we really do? How far could we really go?
And Bob Gibson used to ref the basketball games down in Kellam. And I remember playing down there in a league and having him call some fouls. I thought were bad calls, but you didn't mess with Bob, though. So you kept that to yourself.
We're producing great athletes today. The one difference I think may be that our community was so contained and so packaged that it was family. Different now, let's say the African-American athletes are spread all over the city.
All of these folks coming from just this one area made you realize that there was something special about this area. And I still think there's something special about this area today.
Marlon Briscoe, though, went on to become the first black quarterback after he was drafted in '68 and to start in the NFL.
When I got that opportunity, I seized the moment and made sure that I represented. I realized the magnitude and the importance of me being successful. If I had not have been successful at what I did in 1968, a lot of the black quarterbacks that followed me would not have gotten an opportunity so soon.
The Great Migration began during World War I and surged again in World War II. Millions of blacks, most of them children and grandchildren of slaves, left the South in search of better jobs, schools, and often refuge from the KKK. They resettled in northern cities like Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Kansas City, and Omaha. Why Omaha? The Union stockyards.
The Omaha Union stockyards is outstanding evidence that the wealth and economic life of Nebraska is directly dependent on agriculture, the most important segment of which is the livestock industry. The Union Stockyards Company of Omaha, which commenced business in 1884, was responsible for making Omaha the great livestock market and meatpacking center it is today. Livestock from 25 states of the Union passed through the Omaha yards each year.
Man, you could smell the packing house on a summer day, man. That south wind was blowing in there.
I lived a block from the packing house. Now, I'm not talking about 2 or 3 miles. I live a block from the packing house, from kindergarten all the way up until college. So that was just part of my fabric. That's part of my DNA. It's the ones from North Omaha that had to get adjusted to the smell. We didn't even know there was a smell.
I had a cousin that lived over in the South Omaha projects with Marlon Briscoe, Ron Kellogg, who was one of the mentors to Marlon. And so sometimes I would spend the weekend over there, spend Saturday night, with my cousin. The windows would be open, and it would be like awful, man. But eventually you'd get used to it, But, when living over in North Omaha, I mean, that smell came all the way over here, man. It was awful. It was awful, man.
In 1955, Omaha eclipsed Chicago as the world's busiest livestock market. A place where ranchers from all over the Great Plains converged to sell their cattle, hogs, and sheep before those animals were led to slaughter. That's why blacks came north. Packing house jobs provided good paychecks as long as you could stomach the work.
The 4 major packers with plants in Omaha helped make that city one of the world's best hog markets. Here we find the nation's finest stockyards facilities, with a modern 11-story livestock exchange building owned and operated by the Stockyards Company.
Passers-by marveled at thousands of pens outside, where ranchers struck deals with packers. But the gory work happened after a sale, when animals were led to slaughter.
After I got out of the military, I was looking for a job, and I went to this packing house over in South Omaha, and I got hired. So the next day, my brother had just gotten out of the Air Force, and he wanted to use my car. So I said, okay, well, just drive me to work, and we'll, you can have the car. So he drives me into work, and he drives in a little further to turn around. I go in the office, and the guy says, well, Bob's upstairs. He'll be right down. The guy that was going to be my supervisor and stuff. So I had my little lunch and stuff, and I saw a cart go by with a dead cow and his head's hanging over, and I'm seeing blood and all that. And so I go back out the door and I flag down my brother. Hey, hold on. That was my first and last day, man. I didn't want any parts of it.
I'll be honest. Early on, I'll just go ahead and say it. Early on, I said Omaha, Nebraska, and this state was Mississippi North. And Mississippi was known for blatant racism.
In Omaha, blacks hoped for an environment more hospitable than Alabama or Mississippi. Instead, they encountered the North's version of Jim Crow. Most corporations and industries didn't hire them. Most restaurants and theaters didn't serve them. Even some doctors refused to care for them.
In a very early age, you wake up black in America, you realize that you're black.
You know, we want peace, but we're not going to just sit down and let you pour hot coffee on our heads and things like that. You know, say thank you, Jesus. That doesn't work.
Because what they were doing at that point in time to me was vicious and mean and racist.
He said, "Get out, I want to search your car." I said, "Do you have a search warrant?" He jammed the shotgun to my head and he said, "This is my search warrant."
So I started getting, hey, Martin Luther King got it, you can get it too, and you know, all that sort of thing. And we started getting some police harassment.
One day, Bob Boozer swam at the downtown YMCA, only to see the pool drain once he and his black friends dried off.
You wouldn't always say it out loud, but you begin to internalize the fact that there must be something wrong with me.
We had this black and white, you know, TV, and I just still have these vivid recollections of these news breaks and seeing the dogs being let loose on people in Alabama and the water hoses and propelling people across the street. I still have vivid memories as a kid coming home and watching that on television.
I walked by there and there were about like 8 cop cars surrounding these guys, and one guy was down on the ground. They had him handcuffed and they were spraying mace in his face. And it just irritated me so much. And then my younger brother was next to me and he stepped up to say something, and this one cop raised a rifle right up in his face. And I thought, okay, I better back down.
When I was 11 years old, my oldest sister's home was burned and a cross was placed in front of her yard. Those kind of things stay, you don't forget them. You don't forget them no matter what. And when you're 11 years old, it's hard to understand that kind of hatred.
North Omaha's greatest generation needed a spark. Bob Gibson's older brother Josh returned home from war in 1945 with his mind on books and sports. He earned a bachelor's degree from Omaha University, then a master's from Creighton. Extremely rare achievements for a black man in his time. But education didn't do him any good. Omaha public schools didn't hire black high school teachers or coaches. So Josh turned his focus to the neighborhood, building the biggest PE class you can imagine. Through the Near North YMCA and Kellum Rec Center, he put hundreds of kids in programs. Boxing, tumbling, wrestling, volleyball, golf, tennis, soccer, badminton, even ping pong. But his biggest passion? That was baseball and his little brother Bob. In '47, inspired by Jackie Robinson's breakthrough in the major leagues, Josh started a Little League team for Bob, the YMCA Monarchs, and hauled them out into the country to little towns in Iowa surrounded by corn and filled with white people. When he didn't like an umpire's call, Josh stormed out of the dugout and confronted the white man behind the plate. He occasionally got ejected, but he refused to be cheated. In August 1950, the Monarchs' rickety team bus broke down on the way to the state championships in Wayne. They won the tournament anyway.
You know, one of the reasons North Omaha produced such great athletes was that they had great adults who agreed to be volunteer coaches. I mean, these guys, just gave freely of their time.
My uncle wasn't my father biologically, but he was my father figure. Rodney Weed wasn't my father, but he was a father figure. Josh Gibson was my father, he was a father figure. Bob Rose was my father figure.
How you doing there? I'm worried about that.
They were fathers. They were products of homes where fathers were. They knew how to be a father to a black boy.
Josh Gibson wasn't the only influential mentor. Bob Rose was Marlon Briscoe's cousin and a former Omaha U standout athlete. He should have been coaching high school ball too. Instead, OPS assigned him to Howard Kennedy Grade School, where he took the Sayers brothers under his wing.
Josh was a leader among leaders, a coach among coaches, an athlete in himself, and he produced and never did anything other than produce Bob Gibson. But he produced so many other great athletes, some of which went on to fame, some of which didn't.
This was, I guess, the focal point, the centerpiece. It was just a nice area, a good place to come, relax, have fun.
Competition was stiff though. Competition was stiff. And I think that's what made it so much fun, because the games were great. You have guys breaking away. You had guys that could catch you. There's all different types of things you learn. You learn, pick up something new all the time. It was just an exciting time. You couldn't wait to get down here, and once you got down here, it would be hard to leave.
A lot of football, a lot of touch football, a lot of what was called touch football. It was really a modified version of tackle. But it was just a lot of activity going on, a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. The athletes around us were all really good and dedicated folks.
Kountze Park, taking a shovel over to the park around the basket and shoveling snow away from the rim so I could shoot hoops. Didn't know the impact something like that was going to have on my career, later on in life.
I got to play with the bigger guys, the older guys.
They kind of called you off the sideline, right?
Well, I stood there long enough, they had to do something, because I was determined to get in, and I found a guy that once I got in, then I was a regular.
It was incredible, but I've always felt that I've been able to succeed because of my experience here in Omaha and the people that I grew up with, and in the education that I got here too at the same time.
As America entered the 60s, racial tensions were rising. Civil rights protests in the South and the resulting murders of blacks like Medgar Evers inspired a wave of activists in Omaha. Most notable was a Creighton Law student turned barber named Ernie Chambers. Meanwhile, a paradox crystallized. In 1964, Bob Gibson beat the Yankees in Game 7 of the World Series. He returned to Omaha a conquering hero. His parade rolled through downtown. The mayor presented him with a key to the city. Thousands cheered him. But when he tried to buy a house in West Omaha, no, his neighbors did not want to live next to a black family. In 1967, the legislature affirmed homeowners' right to discriminate against blacks, voting down an open housing law. 2 days later, a housing developer in northwest Omaha told Bob Boozer he couldn't buy a lot there. Didn't matter that he was an NBA All-Star or that his salary exceeded his would-be neighbors. He was black. He'd have to find somewhere else. On March 4th, 1968, America's chief spokesman for segregation came to Omaha as a third-party presidential candidate. Through the 60s, George Wallace inflamed violence across the South. That night, the former Alabama governor spoke at Omaha's Civic Auditorium, less than a mile from 24th and Cumming. His speech incited a melee in the crowd that spilled out onto North 24th Street. 3 nights of rioting followed. Political tragedies accumulated. Spirits broke. On North 24th Street, businesses boarded up and closed. City planners ran the North Freeway through the heart of the neighborhood.
It moved out thousands of people. They tore down 1,000 homes. So you dispersed people who grew up community, they're together. Now they're scattered all over the place. Their neighborhood has been broken up. That sense of community has been broken up.
When people were displaced and all of those things went on, you could see the decay starting to occur. I'm glad that I got the opportunity, first of all, to see before the disintegration and the displacement of nearly 11,000 people.
People don't appreciate the impact that the North Freeway had on destroying North Omaha.
Then the economic backbone of North Omaha collapsed. Meatpacking jobs vanished like an odor in the wind.
Most of the adult men in my neighborhood, even along Pinckney Street, they worked at the packing house. And so when the packing houses started to close and those folks lost their livelihood and there weren't a lot of options for black men in employment in Omaha, you started to see the decline in the community.
This was the anchor of the community, the industry that drew thousands of blacks to Omaha in the first place. Packing house jobs put food on dinner tables, showed young athletes how to work hard, and inspired them to seek a better life. Nobody imagined an Omaha without the stockyards.
Should become the world's largest livestock market.
But the industry crashed. Those 80-year-old packing houses fell apart, and competitors built smaller, automated plants in rural towns, closer to the livestock. Cudahy closed in '67, then Armour in '68, Swift followed in '69. According to Omaha native Kathy Hughes, it was like a bomb exploded in the neighborhood. Unemployment soared, and the jobs that blacks did find didn't pay as well. In '69, open housing finally passed in the legislature, but even good news produced unintended consequences. North Omaha's most successful people, doctors, lawyers, accountants, educators, opted to move out of the old neighborhood. They wanted better houses and schools for their children. By the 80s, this old, vibrant neighborhood resembled a ghost town. On the same street corners where Bob Gibson played ball with his buddies, gang members sold drugs.
When I was a kid, I could get anything I'd ever want, up or down 24th Street. You know, to lose that in the late 60s, early 70s had a devastating impact. You know, people talk about, you know, benign neglect. That's not benign, that's deliberate, that's intentional, that there was no reinvestment.
The environment was wonderful. Everybody was poor, everybody was happy. And that poorness had a sense of unity.
The black community still was moving, and the Street of Dreams was still there in spite of the redlining.
If we could have kept our community contained with all of its glory, you know, as the economics changed, we'd have been a community that would be, you know, something to talk about.
Deliberate, intentional avoidance of any redevelopment of the near North Side after the riots. You know, you drive from Lake to Cumming, and most of those vacant lots were victims of the riots. Burned and then torn down, and no reinvestment in the community.
It's sad when I drive down there. There's basically nothing there. They never built it up again after '68.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a...
Whereas on September 28, 1919, an African-American laborer named Mr. William Will Brown was lynched by a lawless white mob near the steps of the Douglas County Courthouse at 18th and Harney Streets, preceding the day of race rioting that came to be known as the Omaha Race Riot of 1919. And whereas not content with his death by lynching, members of the riotous mob tied Mr. Brown's lifeless body to the rear of an automobile and dragged him around downtown Omaha, ending at the intersection of 17th and Dodge Streets, where they burned his corpse on a public cry.
In the soil is the blood of those who labor through the indignation of slavery. In the soil is the sweat of those who fought during the era of the Civil Rights Movement. But also in the soil is the opportunity for new life. Through this soil, we are able to concretize the memory of Mr. Brown.
It is necessary and it is prudent for us to reflect on what happened to Will Brown 100 years ago. It is prudent for us to continue to remember these kinds of things. But it is also prudent for us to recognize that Satan is still at the gate. Satan is still doing his work. When we have mobs of individuals with tiki torches and sounds of white power in 2019, 100 years later, we have to do something about that.
During the middle months of 1919, dozens of race riots shocked the United States. And much to our shame, one of the worst was right here in Omaha. The riot and murder of Will Brown was the terrible end result of a collision of humanity's failures: racial hatred, crime, corruption, labor unrest, ethnic hatred and mistrust directed towards certain neighborhoods, government ineptness, and reckless journalism that incited fear and hate.
Do hereby proclaim today, the day of September 28th, 2019, as Will Brown Day in Nebraska, and I do hereby urge all citizens to take due note of the observance and the importance of racial reconciliation.
Will Brown's murder is a stain on our history. His name must never be forgotten.
Let us march on until victory is won. Is won.
My point that I'm going to make here, is how many of us went on to do great things. And it was because our parents put all they had in trying to make what happened to us better than what was happening to them. They had limits that they had no control on, and they were going to try to prepare us to try to break through that cycle.
Despite the hardships that I know they went through, despite the redlining, despite all of the barriers that were in their way, they managed to fight through those barriers and make a difference in the community.
As a young person, I was naive enough to believe that by the time I got, way before I got this age, that my kids wouldn't have to deal with the same kind of stuff, but it looks like they'd have this and even more. But our kids, they deserve a future. So I'm concerned about my kids, my grandkids, great-grandkids, and young people.
The community will never be what it was. People, are talking about redoing 24th Street, but you don't have the people there. It'll never be that. It'll be gentrification, something like that. It'll never be the same. Those were great times, but I don't think we'll ever get those back.
There are always people that are going to try and keep us back. There's no question about that. But if we allow them to win, then then what point was all of this work? At what point was 24th and Glory something to celebrate if we don't continue to move forward? We stand on the shoulders of all those people. All those people made a difference, and we stand on their shoulders. And we have an obligation to continue to move forward. We have an obligation to continue to strive to seek better understanding, like Martin talked about.
With all of the gains that were made, it was at a sacrifice. And I go back to the family structure. I think the family structure was sacrificed. I'll go to my grave saying that we as a people, if we don't get the family structure back to where it needs to be, then we're going to forever be our own worst enemy.
The hope that I have is that we want to return to a unified community without the poverty. Then we begin to plant and produce all kinds of new superstars like athletes and be able to attribute that to our community. We can attribute the Gale Sayers and all of them to the soil of our community at that time.
Amazing grace, the sound that saves a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear